Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Out of Bounds. I'm John Luck with Mary Evers as we talk about the Boston Bruins, who are set to come back. As we talked about on the last episode of the program, the Boston Bruins and the NHL came out with a return to play plan. Let's give you kind of a recap of what the Bruins have done up to this point. They won the President's Trophy for the first time since the 2013-14 season. I mentioned that's usually a bad omen. They lost to Montreal in a 7-game series. David Pastrnak won a share of the Rocket Richard Trophy, sharing that with Alex Ovechkin, the first time for Pastrnak, the ninth time for Ovechkin. Both had 48 goals. And Tuukka Rask and Yaroslav Halak share the William M. Jennings Award for fewest goals allowed. And just before the break, the Bruins were pretty much on a hot streak, winning 5 of their last 6 games before the long break. Now, we talked about the top 4 seeds in the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference as well. They'll be playing a round-robin tournament to determine the top 4 seeds for the original playoffs that will get set probably in August. So let's talk about this, Mary. You are our resident Bruins fan. I think the only Bruins fan in the history of Out of Bounds. So what do you make of this round robin tournament for the NHL?
I have some mixed feelings about it because I still don't think that it's super fair that these teams have to play for a playoff spot in the round robin tournament. I do think, however, that'll be beneficial for all of the teams involved to have some kind of games before the playoffs start, because it's not like they're going to get eliminated in these games. So even if they end up in 4th place somehow, which I really don't think they will, they'll still be in the playoffs. And like I said last week, with the NHL playoffs, it really, going into the playoffs, I think this is the sport where it's most that it's like the season is wiped clean when you hit the playoffs, because there's an opportunity for every single team that makes the playoffs to win the Stanley Cup at the end of the day. Now, obviously, there are some teams that are better than others, but the top 4 teams in the Eastern Conference are all really, really strong teams that had very good seasons. And I'm pretty sure all of them were on a decent hot streak as the season ended, especially the Flyers. They were actually like really revving up to finish the regular season strong before this ended. And so I think the Flyers are going to be kind of a sneaky pick, and they might be issues for the Bruins. And then with the Lightning, because of what happened to them last year, winning the President's Trophy and then choking it in the first round of the playoffs, I think that they have a lot to prove this year, and it's going to make those guys that were on the team last year want to fight a little bit harder than they did last year, because it seemed like they got a bit too complacent as the season went on. And obviously with the Capitals and Alexander Ovechkin, those are always a team you got to watch out for, because Ovi's probably the best player in the league, and has been for a while. So it's going to be a tough 4 games. So I'm glad that there's no elimination when it comes to the round robin seeding, but I'm still not super thrilled that it has any kind of seeding purposes at all.
Well, we talked about this last time, and the fact that if this were just a regular exhibition tournament, you'd have your 4th line forward starting on the 1st line, and you wouldn't have Patrice Bergeron, Brad Marchand spelling the ice.
Right.
Now, this works out for the Bruins because teams 5 through 12, they're going to be playing in a qualifying tournament. I think that's best of 5. But if they hit a skid or lose 2 out of 3, then all of a sudden their backs are against the wall. If the Bruins lose 2 out of 3, then, what's the worst that happens? They go and fall to the 3 seed or the 4 seed.
Right.
With a team like this that has a lot of long tenured players, and we'll get to that in a little bit, I think this works out great for them. The only question for me, and we talked about this earlier, is what does this mean for the goaltending situation? Because the Bruins have been riding Tuukka Rask for a long time now. Yaroslav Halak has proven that he can be a good backup. Does he see any action in any of these 3 games? And one thing to note here is the top 4 seeds, as you mentioned, Boston, Tampa Bay, Washington, Philadelphia. The Bruins against Tampa Bay, Washington, and the Flyers, 1-1-1.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Bruins can go probably 2-1, and at worst get the 2 seed. I think that might be probably the better spot for them as far as the matchup goes, because if they do reseed, then you go ahead and face the worst seed. And for some insane reason, Bruins fans are having a stroke over the possibility of facing the Montreal Canadiens. I have no idea why.
No.
But there were more details that were released about this playoff coming out, and that is that the 4 regular rounds, the conference quarterfinals, semis, finals, and obviously the cup final, is going to be best of 7. Now, when we heard that the NHL was coming back and the way they were coming back, Bruins fans were feeling like they were going to get hosed, they were going to get the screws put to them. Does this maybe make Bruins fans feel a little better knowing that there is a little bit of room for error once we get into the top 16 teams?
Oh, definitely. And I think that best of 7 is always the best way to go no matter what the sport is. I think that's a very solid foundation for any playoff situation. When they were talking about having especially, I mean, when they were talking about having best of 5, I was worried because a lot of the times, no matter how good the Bruins are, they end up on game 7. I mean, it happened twice last year, and it's happened almost every season. I think they've the last 3 years in a row, the first round, they've played the Maple Leafs and gone to game 7, had to beat them in game 7. So, when I prefer it that the Bruins have kind of the safety net of having game 7 because I think that for one point, I as much as I think they're a good team and a talented team, I think that sometimes they slack off like halfway through the series, and that's exactly what kind of put the nail in the coffin of their series against the Blues last year in the Stanley Cup Finals. So I'm very glad that it'll be best of 7. As for the stuff with the Montreal Canadiens, they're not a very good team. I don't think that if the regular season had played out, they would have even made the playoffs. So I think that I think it's more of the fact that the Bruins, like the Montreal Canadiens and the Bruins have had this history of a rivalry, and sometimes playing them can get into their heads. But I don't think the Canadiens have even been on the Bruins' radar this season, so I'm not worried about it.
I'm not worried about it. It's just funny watching simulcasts of radio shows, and I mean, you can probably figure out which one we're talking about, where the hosts are having a conniption over the fact that a 12 seed can wipe out the 1 seed. Now, if a team can go ahead and choke away the top spot in the NHL, it's the Boston Bruins, and they do have a lot of players familiar with these Stanley Cup runs. Talking about Zdeno Chara, Patrice Bergeron, Brad Marchand, David Krejci.
Mm-hmm.
The list goes on and on. Obviously, this is a unique situation. Teams are going to be going to a couple of hub cities, and nobody has really seen this type of hockey being played where everyone goes to a city with no fans. Is there any type of advantage, you think, when you have these elder statesmen like the Bruins have compared to some of these other teams like the Islanders, the Rangers, the Panthers, the younger teams in the NHL? Do the Bruins have any advantage at all?
Well, I think I do think they have an advantage, and I don't think it's always necessarily down to those guys because obviously those guys have been there, they've won the cup, they've also been there and lost the cup, and I think having kind of that, and though they lost, the majority of that team is still intact, so they all know what it's like to be there, and they've been, and I think that with that gnawing feeling at the back of their minds of how humiliated they were losing game 7 at home in the Stanley Cup Finals last year, I think that'll give them a bigger advantage than a lot of the other teams have.
I did do some stats digging when we talked about those 4 players. Patrice Bergeron, 136 games with the Boston Bruins in the playoffs. Daniel Chara, one better at 137. Brad Marchand, 108. And David Krejci, 138. The thing that sticks out to me is the assist numbers, and obviously you're going to have more assists being dished out than goals. Patrice Bergeron, 63 assists. Brad Marchand, 53 assists. But I think it comes down to the familiarity. That top line has been very productive, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but having Martian and Bergeron on that top line and the other guy kind of going in and out, I think that kind of gives a sense of familiarity that despite the sheet of ice that you're playing on, knowing that you can pass the puck off to the left side and Martian's going to be there,
Right.
maybe go behind the net, try and create some confusion and chaos, that can work out to the Bruins' favor because if they play a very fast game, I don't think that's a Bruins game. I think they're kind of slow down, get the puck into the past the blue line, and kind of get the best shot. I don't think they're like a Toronto that gets up the ice, gets those highlight reel shots.
I think it's funny because I think that with the Bruins, it's kind of a weird effect where you're right. I think their forwards kind of like to slow the game down and take their time. And I think that it is a testament to how long those guys have been doing it and doing it with each other. But their defense is very fast and they fly around the ice like you wouldn't believe. And so I think there's kind of the push and pull of when we're on offense, we're going to take our time and we're going to do things right. And the defense is we're going to attack hard. And I think that kind of throws some of their opponents off because they don't know when it's going to change and when they're going to slow down and when they're going to speed up. And especially with Bergeron and Marchand, obviously those two guys, it's like they have some kind of telekinetic connection now where they can just shoot the puck off and know exactly where they're going to be, or even swing it around the boards and know that it's going to hit exactly where it needs to be. And I don't think there are any two pair of forwards in this league that have the connection that Marchand and Bergeron have, and that always gives the team an edge.
So I'm just going to go off script here a little bit and talk about the production of the first line, because throughout the season, I think this was kind of one of those underlying problems for a team that is a President's Trophy winner, the production of their top line. According to Daily Faceoff, when you have the Bruins' more traditional first line in there, Marchand, Bergeron, Pastrnak, the first line responsible for 107 goals and 238 points. Then you go to the second line. They're responsible for 29 goals and 88 points.
Yeah.
Third line, 41 goals, 85 points. And then the fourth line gets fribbles, and they don't really count when it comes to talking about Boston Bruins hockey. But is there concern as a Bruins fan looking at those numbers and seeing the heavy production by the first line, especially when you go on the road and the home team can make the changes last, I believe?
Yeah, I'm definitely concerned about that, especially because not only is that top line carrying the team, but that top line is your oldest players, with the exception of Pastrnak. And coming out of this stretch where they haven't been able to play or work out or anything, I'm not entirely sure what kind of shape those guys are going to be in. So that's one of the things that I'm most concerned about going into this. So people like Jake DeBrusk, Charlie Coyle, they need to step up and actually help out a little bit. It's one of Bruce Cassidy's favorite things to switch these lines up and just kind of insert different people into different lines. And sometimes that works for them, but I don't think that this is going to be one of those times, because if they're only practicing right now with 3 or 4 people at a time and the goalie, it's going to be those people that you're practicing with that you're going to be stuck on the line with, because at this point you can't practice with other people and there's going to be no connection with other people. So I'm afraid that we're going to have to rely very heavily on that top line. But I think that Pastrnak is going to kind of end up bearing the brunt of all of that.
Now, the defense core of this team, obviously led by Zdeno Chara, a 43-year-old man, has had some shakeups because Torrey Krug has been in and out of the lineups, obviously, after a long layoff. He'll probably go back in on the second line defense. Any concern there as far as the defensemen go, because Torrey Krug has been out for such a long time, and we don't know if he's going to go ahead and be more worried about his next contract. We talked about that last time.
Right. Torrey Krug, I don't think, is going to be as worried about focusing on the contract as other people might, because he knows he's going to get money. He's one of the best all-around defensemen in the league right now, and he points for defensemen right now, followed quickly by Charlie McAvoy, who I think is going to be your main player on the defense this year. For this playoffs, right as the regular season was ending, he was in the middle of a hot streak. He had not been performing so well at the beginning of the season, and he was picking up everything in his game and especially his offense as the season went on. So I hope that when we come back that he kind of picks up where he was and in the same mindset. And then obviously the defense has suffered a lot of injuries this year, not just Torrey Krug. Brendan Carlo was out for a while. Connor Clifton was out for most of the season. We've had Kempfer and Moore kind of circling in, with Liaison is new. The only defensemen that have been consistent throughout the season are Chara and Grzelcyk. Grzelcyk being having the third most points out of the rest of the defensemen. His game is improved greatly since last year. I think being in the playoffs helped him a lot. And he's definitely has more offensive production, mostly assists. He's still not the biggest goal scorer, but that's fine. Sometimes it's just an assist can make a huge difference. So I think the young BU guys and Charlie McAvoy and Matt Grzelcyk are going to be your kind of best defensemen going into these playoffs.
All right, there was a conversation that came out on NBC Sports Boston that I think is interesting. Darren Dreger, who I believe works up in Canada, TSN, I think is a network, but they were talking to him about the players going to these hub cities being taken away from their family, and this could be something to watch. So
Right.
this is just part of what he said. When they start to learn what's inside that hub, what that world is going to be like, what some of the restrictions are, what kind of access they're going to have to their family, all of those things, I think that's when you are going to get the undercurrent of the player who maybe
Mhm.
doesn't want to play at all this year. There are a number of those players out there, they just haven't surfaced yet because they don't know what the restrictions are going to be. I think we're going to start hearing from those players in the week or weeks ahead. And that was interesting because we're going to start seeing this with the NBA at some point as well. We're going to talk
Mhm.
about on the next edition. Um, the fact that family members aren't allowed to travel with these players, that could be something to watch because obviously with the Bruins, we see that they have a strong family contingent traveling with them on the road. So I mean, if the family members can't go to some of these places or if there's underlying health concerns, does
Mhm.
that factor into the back of these hockey hardo minds?
Oh, it has to. And and we've never gone through a thing like this where the reason the season has been canceled is because of health risks. Um, and it's hard to sit here and judge players that don't want to come and play or go to these hub cities and play because their health is at risk, the health of their families are at risk, or they're being separated from their families. And I think that it's impossible to sit there and judge them for that because that's an, a very understandable concern. Because for most people, your family and your health has to come first. And at the end of the day, playing hockey is a job and they don't need to do it. I mean, these guys are making a decent amount of money and losing out on that's probably not going to break them. Some of the younger guys probably would, but the older guys that have families and have had these careers for a while and have made their money, they might not want to play. And that I think that's completely understandable. Is it going to suck? Yeah, it's definitely going to suck. If you're a Bruins fan, you want to see Patrice Bergeron play. You want to see Brad Marchand play, especially because they are getting older, and this might be their last chance to run to take a run for the cup. So it's going to suck, but you can't blame these guys for being human beings because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
When we talk about hockey players, there's such a lore about the fact that they can go ahead and play through anything. I mean, Patrice Bergeron played basically on the verge of death. Zdeno Chara played with a broken jaw.
Mhm.
Those physical ailments are kind of a badge of honor when you're talking about hockey and the Stanley Cup final. If you're
Right.
missing games because of a pandemic or health issues, to me personally, I think that's a reasonable reason you don't want to take it home with you. There could be newborns involved, who knows? But
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what it's like in the locker room if a player
Mhm.
decides to say, you know what, guys, I have children at home. I have a
Yeah.
wife at home that, health isn't exactly perfect. So I'm
Right.
not going to risk playing with the team right now, for a 4 month span and risk getting my family sick.
Right. And I understand that. And obviously there are probably going to be some locker rooms that there are issues with that. I don't see that being an issue with the Bruins locker room because they're probably one of the tightest knit groups on in the NHL right now. And I'm sure that I mean, we all have Zoom at our disposal, and even though they can't see each other, I'm sure that they're using platforms like that to talk to each other. And I'm sure they've had to have this dialogue because you have to. You have to prepare for what's coming. And what I would hope is that these guys are talking through those scenarios and trying to explain it to their teammates. And as long as they're keeping that communication open and honest, I don't see it being a problem in their locker room because at least they were straight with their teammates. And that's kind of all you can ask for at the end of the day.
Now, we don't know if this is going to be the situation where no family is allowed. Maybe a couple of family members are allowed, but
Yeah.
more to come on that front. But getting back to the game on the ice, obviously,
Mhm.
we talked about the potential of facing a team like Montreal. But if you are the Boston Bruins and have the potential to face a team like a Toronto, a Columbus, or the Habs, is there a team you don't want to see the Bruins face as their first playoff opponent?
I think Columbus would be kind of the hardest opponent when it comes to actually being able to play hockey, where Toronto and the Habs is more of a mentally tough team because those are the teams that you always have to play and you always have the rivalry with. I mean, playing the Maple Leafs might be a good omen for them because the last couple of years they've had to beat them in game 7 to get out of the first round of the playoffs. So maybe they need to do that again in order to be successful. I'm not sure. But I think Columbus is going to be the toughest team out of those kind of three options because they're definitely the most talented team. out of those three options. I mean, the Maple Leafs couldn't even beat a backup goalie. So,
Uh, well, oddly enough, I think it's Toronto that could give the Bruins more trouble. The Bruins are 2-1 against the Maple Leafs. One of those games canceled because of the long break. But
mhm.
at some point, the Game 7 curse has to break. I mean, you look at the New England Patriots and all
Yeah.
the wins they've had against the Miami Dolphins at Gillette Stadium. What happened this year? It broke, and the Patriots broke.
Yeah.
All it takes is one bounce of the puck in Game 7. And I think players like Austin Matthews, William Nylander, Andreas Johansson, they have to recognize their potential because I
Mhm.
think this is a very important time. They've already burned through Mike Babcock. It
Mm.
They need to prove that they can get up the ice, get their shots in the net, and win. Because if they lose this year and lose in the first round, potentially against the Bruins, I think that could be the end of this Maple Leafs run. And I think that
Yeah.
it's a very talented team that a first round defeat would be considered a choke job by the Maple Leafs. So maybe there's that extra fuel behind them, basically.
Right. And I think especially guys like Austin Matthews who are gonna he's if he's not already, he's gonna be one of the biggest stars in the NHL in the next couple of years. And if the Maple Leafs keep losing, he's not gonna wanna stick around there. He's gonna wanna get traded or leave in free agency. I don't know what the status of his contract is right now. Um, and that could be potentially damning for the Maple Leafs because they're trying to build their team around talent like him right now. But if they're never successful and they're losing to the same team over and over again in the same round, I mean, I personally would get tired of that and start looking for new opportunities. So I think you're right. If they want to keep Austin Matthews and the other younger guys, they're going to have to step up and really be prepared for this next playoff season.
John Tavares, another guy that signed a long-term deal with the Maple Leafs, very pricey deal
Hmm.
as they go all in. So that's all for this edition of Out of Bounds. Coming up on our next episode, we're going to talk about the NBA and their return as we have a date. We have a number of teams. We kind of have a game plan ready to go. We'll talk about that next time. For Mary Evers, I'm John Luck. Thanks for watching.